For as long as I can remember, I felt like I wasn't enough. My parents never said it outright, but they didn't have to. The look in their eyes when I was born, hoping for a boy, said it all. When my sister Laura came along 4 years later, the truth was undeniable. I was Mary, their firstborn daughter, and I wasn't what they had wanted. I once overheard Mom telling Dad, maybe the next one will be a boy, after Laura's birth, but there would be no next one. Complications during Laura's delivery meant Mom couldn't have more children. Their dream of a son vanished, replaced by the hope that one day their daughters might give them grandsons instead. Growing up in our small suburban home, I watched Laura effortlessly charm everyone around her. With a flash of her big brown eyes, she could get whatever she wanted. Our parents melted like butter, doting on her every whim. I, on the other hand, learned early on that I wouldn't get the same attention. So, I became independent, focusing on taking care of myself while Laura basked in the spotlight. We had everything we needed: clothes, food, a safe home, and a good education, but love and warmth felt scarce, at least for me. Over time, I stopped expecting it. I built emotional walls and got used to standing on my own. During my senior year of high school, I announced at dinner, I'm going to study economics. Mom paused, her fork hovering midair. Are you sure, honey? That's such a technical field. Dad nodded in agreement. What about teaching or nursing? Something more suitable for a young lady. I've already been accepted to State University, I replied, refusing to back down. I even got a partial scholarship. Mom sighed. Well, it's your choice, she said, her disappointment palpable. By then, I'd stopped letting it hurt. Across the table, Laura smirked. I'm thinking of studying psychology, she announced, her voice sugary sweet. Mom and Dad lit up. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom gushed. You've always been so good with people. I pushed my peas around my plate, letting their voices fade into the background. I had long since given up trying to earn their approval. Instead, I focused on the future and the freedom college would bring. I met Scott during my third year at State University, a senior in the economics department. He literally bumped into me at the library, sending my statistics textbook crashing to the floor. Professor Timothy's macroeconomics class, right? He asked, handing me the book. I've seen you ask all the smart questions. I blushed. Yeah, that's me, the one who drags class out with questions, not annoying at all. He smiled. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime. I could tell you about the upper-level courses you'll take next year. That coffee turned into dinner, then movie nights, and before long, we were inseparable. For the first time, someone truly saw me. Scott didn't compare me to anyone else. He liked me for who I was. After he graduated, Scott got a job at Anderson Consulting. While I stayed to finish my degree, he waited for me, and when I graduated, we moved into a small downtown apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. When I introduced him to my parents, their reaction surprised me. Scott, Mom practically squealed, we're so happy to finally meet you. Will you be joining us for Thanksgiving, Christmas? Dad clapped him on the shoulder. Son, we've heard so much about you. Tell me about your job. Mary says you're in finance. The word son hit me like a brick. Of course, they were thrilled. They were finally getting the son they'd always wanted. Even if it was through marriage, they showered Scott with attention, asking about his career, his future plans, and when he might want to settle down. Meanwhile, Laura sat in the corner, glaring daggers. Still single and living at home, she couldn't stand that. For once, I had something she didn't. A year later, during a quiet dinner at home, Scott proposed. I said yes without hesitation. Despite my parents' insistence on a big wedding, we chose a small, intimate ceremony. It's your big day, Mom argued. Don't you want something more special? This is special, I told her firmly. For once, I didn't care if it wasn't what she wanted, it was what I wanted. The ceremony was perfect. Surrounded by close friends and family in a small garden, Scott and I exchanged vows and celebrated with a simple dinner reception. It felt right to begin our married life in the same modest apartment where we had built so much together. After our honeymoon, the questions started. So, when can we expect some good news? Mom asked, her eyes shining with expectation. We're saving for a house first, I explained repeatedly. We want to be financially stable before starting a family. Dad shook his head. Your mother and I didn't have much when we started out, and we managed just fine. Every family dinner turned into an update on their friends' growing families. Did you hear the Hendersons just became grandparents again? Another boy. Or, the Smith's daughter announced she's pregnant, and she's younger than you, Mary. After 3 years of saving, Scott and I finally bought our first house. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, or at least, ours and the bank's. The moment we signed the mortgage papers, I braced for the baby questions to intensify. But I didn't expect Laura's announcement just 5 months later. "I'm pregnant," Laura announced during Thursday dinner, her hand resting delicately on her still flat stomach. "It's David's." David, her boyfriend of 7 months, was someone none of us really liked. He was unreliable, immature, and generally aloof. True to form, he disappeared as soon as Laura started showing, leaving her to move back in with our parents. But instead of treating the situation as a scandal or a source of shame, my parents embraced it. They transformed their home into a shrine for their future grandchild. When little Angela was born, you'd think she was royalty. Laura's old room became a fully furnished nursery, stocked with every baby item imaginable. My parents practically rearranged their entire lives to help raise her. "Isn't she perfect?" Mom would coo, rocking Angela during our visits. "Don't you just want one of your own, Mary?" What hurt even more than my parents' constant pressure was watching Scott with Angela. He adored her, getting down on the floor to play, making silly faces, and spending hours entertaining her with stuffed animals and storybooks. "Scott is such a natural with children," Mom would say pointedly, her eyes darting to me. "He's going to make such a wonderful father." Determined to make her words true, I started tracking my cycle, taking prenatal vitamins, and following every piece of advice pregnancy websites offered. But month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, Scott spent more and more time at my parents' house, enchanted by Angela. "She's such a sweet kid," he'd say on the drive home. "Did you see her trying to walk? She almost said uncle today." "You're so good with her," Mom would gush during our visits. "Just imagine how amazing you'll be with your own children." I'd smile and nod, but inside, anxiety gnawed at me. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What if something was wrong? I told myself to be patient, that it would happen when the time was right. After a year of trying with no success, my hope began to waver. Then Mom found out. "A whole year, Mary?" she exclaimed, horrified. "Something's wrong. You need to see a doctor immediately." Before I even left her house, she was already texting me the contact information for fertility specialists. To get her off my back, I made an appointment. Scott came with me, holding my hand in the exam room while the doctor asked questions and ran tests, blood work, ultrasounds, the works. Finally, the results came in. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently. "The tests show that you're infertile." Her words felt like a physical blow. Scott squeezed my hand, but I barely registered it. The doctor continued talking about options, IVF, adoption, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. That night, Scott and I sat at the kitchen table, picking at our takeout. "We can look into adoption or IVF," he offered softly. "There are options." I nodded, but I felt hollow. How could I tell my family? How would they react? I decided to rip off the band-aid during our next family dinner. "Mom, Dad," I began during a quiet moment, "I need to tell you something." All eyes turned to me as I took a deep breath. "I saw a specialist. I can't have children. I'm infertile." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom's face twisted with disgust. "Infertile," she repeated, nearly spitting the word. "What kind of woman can't do the one thing she's supposed to do?" Dad wouldn't even look at me. "An empty vessel," he muttered, "just a useless flower." Laura smirked, bouncing Angela on her knee. "Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is." Desperate for support, I looked to Scott, but he just stared at his plate, saying nothing. Tears burned my eyes as I pushed back from the table and ran out of the house, ignoring their voices calling after me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back, but Scott kept going. He spent time with Angela, chatted with Laura, and listened to my parents. He'd come home full of stories. "Angela learned a new song today," he'd say. "You should have seen her dancing around the living room." Or, "Laura made this amazing lasagna, she's really getting good at cooking." Each word was a knife in my heart. At night, I'd lie awake next to him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering if he resented me for not being able to give him children. The guilt consumed me, and it only got worse when he came home with that wistful look in his eyes after playing with Angela. Then came the day everything fell apart. It was a regular Saturday. I came home early from work, arms full of Scott's favorite Chinese takeout, but the house was dark and empty. His car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but something felt off. I called his phone, no answer. I called again, but it went straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. Laura Thompson posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, But something made me click this time. My stomach dropped as the image loaded, Scott sitting on my parents' couch, Angela in his lap, and Laura pressed up against his side. All three were grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hand shook as I grabbed my car keys. The logical part of my mind tried to reason that there could be an innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew better. The driveway was packed, Mom's car, Dad's truck, and Scott's sedan. The front door was unlocked. As always, I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Voices floated from the living room. "Scott, you know we already think of you as a son," Mom was saying, "and you deserve to be happy. You've been amazing with Angela." "And Laura," Dad added, "well, she's young, fertile, you could have more children together. Why stay trapped in a marriage with—" Mom's voice dropped, but I still caught the venom in her tone. "A barren woman." I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I burst into the room, making them all jump. The scene before me was a nightmare, my parents and Laura on one couch, Scott in Dad's armchair, and Angela playing on the floor between them. They looked like one big happy family, planning to cut me out. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. Scott looked ashamed, at least he had the decency for that, but my parents didn't even flinch. "Mary," Mom said, standing up with her chin held high, "we're just having an honest discussion about what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister?" "Well, someone has to think about his future," Dad snapped. "You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves. Laura can." I turned to Scott, my heart breaking. "Scott? I'm sorry, Mary," he said quietly, still not meeting my eyes, "but, they're right. I want children, a family, and I've developed feelings for Laura." Laura smirked, placing her hand on Scott's arm. "You don't belong here anymore," she said smugly. "This is my family now." I looked around the room, my dad's stern disapproval, my mom's cold satisfaction, Laura's triumphant smile, and Scott's guilty expression. Years of marriage and a lifetime of family ties meant nothing to them. Without another word, I turned and walked out. At home, I packed a suitcase in a daze, leaving a simple note for Scott: "File for divorce. My lawyer will contact yours." The divorce was swift and impersonal. We split everything evenly. I moved into a small apartment across town, burying myself in work to forget the pain, but social media wouldn't let me. One morning during a coffee break, a coworker gasped at her phone. "Oh my God, Mary, I'm so sorry, I forgot to unfollow your sister." She tried to hide her screen, but it was too late. I saw it, Laura in a lavish white wedding dress, Scott at her side in a tux, and my parents smiling proudly. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. I hoped they were happy. 2 years later, another post appeared: "Welcome baby Shirley." My replacement had given them the child they always wanted. Scott now had his perfect family, Angela, whom he'd adopted, and a new baby with Laura. That day, I deleted all my social media. Life has a funny way of surprising you. One Sunday, I was grocery shopping when my cart accidentally bumped into someone else's. "I'm so sorry," a deep voice said. I looked up into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm Steven," he said, helping me pick up my scattered groceries. "Can I buy you coffee to make up for being a klutz?" One coffee turned into dinner, then dating. Before I knew it, I was falling in love again. This time, I promised to be honest. "I need to tell you something," I said one night. 7 months into our relationship, I can't have children. I'm infertile. Steven took my hands, his eyes steady. "Mary, I love you. If we want kids someday, we'll adopt, or we won't. It doesn't matter. I just want you." We married in a small courthouse ceremony, no family drama, no grand expectations, just love. A year into our marriage, I started feeling strange, nausea in the mornings, dizziness at random times. Steven insisted I see a doctor. "Congratulations," the doctor said, smiling. "You're pregnant." I stared at her, stunned. "That's impossible. I'm infertile. I have the tests to prove it." She smiled gently. Sometimes the human body surprises us. Even in cases of diagnosed infertility, pregnancies happen. That night, Steven and I cried tears of joy and disbelief. We didn't tell my family, they'd lost the right to share in my happiness. 10 months later, I held my son in my arms, a perfect, beautiful boy. We named him Jack, meaning defender of mankind. I looked at his tiny face and felt nothing but pure love. No bitterness, no anger, just peace. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Jack thrived, and Stephen was the most devoted father. We rarely went out, but one night we decided to celebrate Stephen's promotion at a downtown Italian restaurant. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but no, it was Laura, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who was definitely not Scott. They were tucked into a corner booth, but not hidden enough. Her fingers played through his hair as they kissed deeply. My hand shook as I discreetly snapped several photos. "Mary?" Stephen touched my arm. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." I showed him the pictures. "That's Laura," I said, "with someone who isn't her husband." "Are you going to send them to him?" he asked. My finger hovered over the send button. It would be so easy. One click and I could destroy their perfect little family, just as they had destroyed mine. But I shook my head, saving the photos to a secure folder. "No," I said quietly, "I'm better than them." A year later, we visited a friend in my old neighborhood and decided to walk to a nearby park. Rounding a corner, we ran into them, Mom, Dad, Laura, and Scott, loading groceries into their car. We saw each other at the same time. Their first reaction was to look away, pretending we were strangers, but then their eyes fell on Jack, who was holding my hand and chatting about his toy truck. Mom froze. Who is this?" she stammered. I could have ignored them. I probably should have, but I didn't. "This is my son, Jack," I said calmly. Laura laughed harshly. "Oh, please, everyone knows you can't have kids. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I met her gaze evenly. "I gave birth to him 4 years ago, no adoption agency involved." "That's impossible," Mom whispered. "The doctors were wrong," I said, cutting her off. "It happens sometimes. Rare, but it happens, and here's the proof." I gestured to Jack, who stared curiously at the strangers. Dad's eyes widened. "A grandson," he breathed. "We have a grandson." He stepped forward, and Mom followed, her arms outstretched like she had every right to embrace my child. I stepped in front of Jack. "No," I said firmly, "you don't get to do this. You threw me away like garbage. You lost the right to be in my life, or his." Laura's face turned red as she saw their attention shift to Jack. "Oh, get over yourself, Mary," she spat. "So you popped out one kid. Big deal. I still won. I got your husband. Gave him a real family. Face it, I'm better than you'll ever be." Calmly, I pulled out my phone. "Speaking of family, Laura, why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" Her face blanched. "What are you talking about?" Scott asked, narrowing his eyes. I held out my phone, showing him the photos. "Here's your loving wife with someone else," I said. Scott's face darkened as he grabbed the phone. Mom and Dad crowded around, their mouths falling open. 2 months later, I heard through the grapevine that Scott had discovered he was infertile, which meant Shirley couldn't possibly be his. Furious, he left Laura and refused to pay support for either child. Laura moved back in with my parents, her perfect life in ruins. They tried to reach out to me after that. "Please, Mary," Mom begged one day through my door, "let us be part of Jack's life. He's our only grandson." "You should have thought of that," I replied, "before you called me an empty vessel. Actions have consequences." Stephen stood beside me. "Family isn't about DNA," he said later as we watched Jack build with his blocks. "It's about love, respect, and loyalty." Looking at my little family, I knew he was right. We had everything we needed. The family I built was the one I was meant to have. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.